Hello, Ted.
Good morning.
Thanks for agreeing to being in conversation with me.
You're welcome.
And I would like to start where it all started for you with the Alexander technique. So when did you first encounter the technique? And so how did it happen? What did you do at the time and so on?
I first heard of it in Australia at 1978, 79, because I think Dr Barlow had been visiting Australia. So I heard a bit of an interview on radio, but I wasn't that interested in the Alexander technique. I was training in oriental medicine at the time, and I was also working full time. So my training in oriental medicine was in the evening, and I was interested in what's now called alternative approaches to life, and that's when I first heard of the Alexander technique. But I didn't think any more of it. I had no intention of becoming an Alexander teacher, or even going for Alexander lessons. It wasn't on my radar as it.
So you heard something about?
Yes, I had it been mentioned in a radio program.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in Canberra. I was living near Canberra at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't actually meet the technique in the sense of having my first lesson until probably January 1981.
Mm-hmm.
In London. I was passing through London on my way back to Australia. And for some reason I decided not to get on the plane. Intuition, which I listened to on this occasion. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later I met with Mr Macdonald. People ask me, how did you find out about him? I don't know. It just happened.
So you had the intuition not to take a plane?
Yeah.
Stayed in London with nothing to do, basically.
Nothing to do, just wait. It was a very striking period of my life. It was a period where there was a lot of kind of deja vu, if there is such a thing. It was the only time in my life I had a whole series of experiences that would be in that way of looking at the world. And in that period, I met Mr Macdonald, as I've said, and there's an old saying, when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears. So it wasn't the Alexander technique per se that kept bringing me back to him. It was his being. And then after I started having regular lessons with him 2 or 3 a week for a few months, and then he kind of took the initiative asking me if I wished to train. And the only reason I trained is because I costed it, and I reckoned I could afford. It was the cheapest way financially to be around him. I just wanted to be around him. That's why I trained.
So when did your training begin?
I met him in January 81. I began training after Easter the same year. And then I finished in 84. Finished in inverted commas.
You graduated?
Well,
you got your paper?
Got my piece of paper, yeah.
Okay, but you continued to having lessons with him?
Until he died, yeah. Saw him every week, sometimes several times a week. And he died in 1991. He died shortly after Dr Barlow, who was also another big influence in my life. So I was with him for 10 years, obviously not a full 10 years, but frequently within those 10 years. And through him I met Margaret Goldie. And then later on, about 1987, I started working with Walter Carrington.
So you worked with quite a lot of the first generation teachers who were directly trained by Alexander.
Yeah, my main teachers were Mr Macdonald, Miss Goldie, Walter Carrington, Bill Barlow, although I had lessons with Marjory as well. but I was closer to Bill than I was to Marjorie.
Mm.
And briefly I met, years later I had 2 long conversations with Erica Whittaker. I forget where my chain of thought was.
So the first generation teachers you had first?
Mr Macdonald came first, and then there was a few people in the training, and I noticed something different about how they were working, and asked them where they were getting that from, and that's when I heard Miss Goldie's name mentioned for the first time. So I waited one term, and then I rang her and asked if I could come and see her. So then I began with her. I used to see her every 2 weeks, up until the end of her life.
That was how long after your training, or was it in the time of your training?
It was the second term of my training. I started seeing her after, probably in the summer of 1981.
Okay.
And she was a big, big influence. And in 1984, 85, I started working with Dr Barlow, because he invited me to teach in his practice, which was then over at the back of Albert Hall. He used to have a flat there, which had been converted into a teaching centre. So then I worked with him until he died. And he died in 1991, towards the end of the summer, I think it was.
Okay, so that was...
He probably died around September, and because he and Mr Macdonald were good friends, and Mr Macdonald died not long after. And I met Walter. I started working with him in 1987.
Okay.
And they were my main teachers. Met Erica Whittaker, an Australian in London, but I never had a lesson. We just had 2 very long conversations, private conversations. And then I met Marjory Barlow twice. And that was, but they weren't, I didn't study with them.
And can you briefly describe what the most important learning from each of these teachers was, if that's possible?
I don't think it is possible, actually. I mean, I'm searching to see, what can I say?
Take your time. Would you say that Mr Macdonald was the biggest influence?
I never separated him out. I mean, in some ways he was, but he was part of a whole. I mean, for me, Mr Macdonald and Miss Goldie and Walter, those 3 in particular, and Bill to a degree, were as one. I never, they kind of, sometimes I would see, especially the first 3, I would see them all in the same week. I had private lessons with each one of them. If they were alive, I'd still be seeing them. Really, what the essence was, it puts you in touch with the unknown.
Yeah.
As Mr Macdonald used to like, sometimes telling, quoting that story pertaining to Alexander, where somebody who had a lesson with him said, "You're asking me to reason from the known into the unknown." But we like to be in the known. So I see a lot of people in the technique that's trying to reinforce the known, rather than going into the unknown, which can be quite frightening, because it can leave you very vulnerable.
Yeah.
You cannot just open to this and be close to that. The opening is complete. It opens, as Miss Goldie said to me once, the work is like a tree, it opens in all directions. So one can become very, very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because if you go into the unknown, it is unknown.
And the mind doesn't like that very much.
No, more than the mind doesn't like it. Something in the body itself doesn't like it. It's a kind of a death. Really, it is a preparation for death. Not just the death of the body at the end of one's life, which has to be faced. The sooner the better. But there's other types of death. Dying to who you think you are. All of one's modern education, nearly all of it is complete nonsense. I don't say that kind of flippantly, but if you really begin to question, really a human being, or the aspiration to become a human being, people assume that they're human beings. It's a rather dangerous assumption. You can become a human being. But one needs to look into that for oneself to see what that means, otherwise it's just fancy language. It becomes meaningless. Or imaginary is not real. But if you question everything that's ever gone into you, from your conditioning, from your education, you see there's no substance in it.
Yeah.
I was been involved in education for years, and I came to the conclusion most of us completely mad. It's reinforcing, but it's very difficult to come free of that, particularly if you're looking for security, and if you've got children, if you've got a family, if you've got a mortgage. How to make money, because you're living on earth, you're living in a materiality. There are some people I've known who can live on next to nothing, but they're quite unique. I'm not talking about tramps. I'm talking about people who have got an inner ability to really live very profoundly simply.
So by choice, yeah.
Yes, or through search that life has taken them someplace. I'm not talking about monks or things like that. You will meet occasionally very, very contained, self-sufficient people. But they're not closed off from life.
Yeah, some people take the choice to kind of step out of society, like, for example, monks, or but that, I think, is not a solution, is it?
No, I mean, it's right for some people. I've known people who've lived in religious orders their entire life, and it was absolutely right for them. And they were very remarkable people. In fact, they were more in life than most people who think they're in life.
Yeah, so how has your view on the Alexander technique evolved over those decades that you are experiencing in it and teaching it?
I never see myself teaching it. I don't see myself as a teacher of the Alexander technique at all. And I'm not saying that in any humble way. In a way, it's just a fact. It cannot be taught. In essence, and I came to this very slowly, that there is no technique. I mean, you start off with what we call a technique. You can read the books, you can have thousands of lessons. And if you've got a sensitive feeling, gradually training the mind, you can begin to come into what can initially be quite a frightening place.
So how do you call it, what you experience?
I don't know. I mean, it's like when I offer Tai Chi to people sometimes, I'm asked to, because I spent many years learning under an old Chinese woman called Miss Rose Lee, and I'll say I can show you to a relative point what I know, and if you're looking for a master, then you got to go and find one. But I remember finding in Mr Macdonald's notes after he died, he said, there's so many masters nowadays. Not a master, but a servant to the work. And all the old teachers didn't call it a technique. With me anyway, they would say, do you wish to work? do you want to work? Let us work.
Yeah.
I remember once coming into Miss Goldie, into our teaching room, and she said to me with quite a force, she said, when you walk in here, I want to see you and not a technique.
Mm.
And that's the essence of it. You can apply a technique, and if it's a good technique, like anything, it has to be a striking thing about those old teachers, particularly Mr Macdonald, was the precision. He was profoundly accurate. If the technique is not accurate, then it will deviate. But I very rarely nowadays do I see accuracy in technique.
Yeah, technique is a tricky term, isn't it? Also,
Yeah.
Also, if you communicate it
You learn
to,
the form.
Yeah.
My own martial arts teacher used to say, if you learn the form needs to be accurate.
Yeah.
If the form is accurate, gradually it helps you to come to the formless.
Mm.
But there is no form, there is no technique. But it's always, everything, every stick has two ends. It's tricky all the time, and it's full of dangers.
Mm.
Ultimately, and from my experience of what I received, the essence of it is spiritual, but that world has been terribly corrupted.
Yeah.
It becomes, it's lunacy, some of the stuff that's been passed now in the name of the spiritual.
Mm. You were also involved in editing the book
Yeah.
that Mr. Macdonald, or actually, he actually didn't do it himself at all, apart from, of course, the content, but the editing was done by you and other people, or how did it come about?
How did it come about? It was I'd have to go back a bit, and probably sometime in the late 60s. From what I found in his notes, he was asked to write a book on the technique, and he began to write it, and for some reason he stopped.
Mm.
And so it was never finished. It was just a few chapters, and he was left in a drawer. There was one or two other bits and pieces that had been published, would have been the wrong word, but circulated, and some interviews that he had given, and also a talk that he had given to the Society of Teachers of the Alexander Technique. And then in his home in Lewis, near Lewis, a place called Swanborough, there was some burst pipes in the house, and in the cleaning up they found these notes in a closet, in a drawer. And his wife, second wife, he was married twice, second wife is Alison. She took the decision that she would like to bring anything they had written together into one volume, into one book.
Mm.
And she asked him, and he was completely opposed to her. And eventually she rang me after a few months of him refusing. At that stage he was no longer coming to London, he was teaching from his home. So I went and spent a few hours with him one morning, and basically we just sat beside each other, and I asked him about publishing, and he was quiet for quite a long time. He was an extraordinarily quiet human being. So probably after a good 40-50 minutes he gave his consent, because I had said to him it would help maybe one person who was in question. And he gave his consent to it, and I remember him saying, you may publish it, or at least it will do no harm. And so that's when we began to, and then I read it aloud to him once or twice. He made a few very small changes. and there was some grammatical corrections. And that was about the only editing that was done. So basically it was just tidied up. And one of the interviews was there was a lot, good bit of editing when it did that. The interview that he gave in, I think it was in San Francisco.
Mm.
And then the photographs were collected. And I had other photographs and sayings from great masters from down the millennia. But he had all those removed. The only thing he kept was the quote from John Bunyan, The Pilgrim's Progress. And he was happy with the photograph from Chartres, which is the verticality. And a lot of people miss the images. The Christ figure is pointing up, which was something Mr Macdonald often did. He would point up and he would say, you take yourself up, and you take the pupil up as well. You don't put your hands on anyone until you've first taken yourself up.
Mm.
So eventually then it was published, or republished, because it had been published before, the first edition, and then there was later on this was a second edition with next to 40-50 pages.
Mm.
And it was published by Moritz.
Yeah.
So I was helped by Jank Fisher and by an editor that I knew in America who did a lot of work as well.
Mm. Mm. But coming back to your work, even if you don't call it teaching, how has your work evolved? So from being influenced by a lot of the early teachers to coming to your own method, or to TED technique.
The key is to listen. You know, the more you can try and work on yourself practically, the work is practical. It's nothing if it's not practical. One begins to see there is no place to go. We're always trying to get someplace, and then gradually you're brought to a place where you see there is no place to go. And I don't mean that in a silly way.
Mm.
You're brought to, this is your life, and you can begin to live it or participate with it. I mean, there's not a day goes by when I don't think of stopping. I think it's a very, very, very difficult thing to try and transmit. And very few people really, contrary to what they might think, very few people really want to change.
Yeah, that's a big problem.
Yeah, as has been said, you cannot change and remain the same. As Alexander said, probably even more accurate, dare I say, to say you cannot be changed and remain the same. We think we can change ourselves, we can't. And that sounds heresy, because in a way it is, but you can prepare. And if change happens, it happens through grace.
Mm.
Happens because of an influence coming from another higher place. Now, the old teachers didn't really spell that out too much. Occasionally Mr Macdonald dropped a very strong hint. He often talked about it. He didn't talk about it, but he would use the expression it. It's said in the book, learn to get out of my way, that is the teacher's way. Then you learn to get out of your own way, which is quite difficult, probably the most difficult of all. And then you learn to get out of its way.
Mm.
And he used to say, little by little it comes. And then one day you might be able or enabled to live up there with it, but up there it comes through you.
Mm. Yeah.
So in the Sufi tradition is the way of fire. You have to be a great deal has to be burnt up. So there is a quality of suffering, but that word has been very corrupted. Helen Luke expresses it very beautifully in a lovely book called On Growing Old. So suffering has to do with bearing. You have to learn how to bear. I would recommend that book to anyone. It's a very, very good book. She was quite a remarkable woman who obviously worked things out for herself. One of the last things Mr Macdonald said to me before he departed the planet, he said, you have to work this out for yourself. You have to find your own way. But one has to be careful with that. Finding your own way doesn't mean going off and becoming deviancy.
Yeah. Well, that's why we can't figure it out by ourselves all the time.
No.
That's why we
need help.
Need help, yes.
Yeah. It's one of the greatnesses of the AA movement, the recognition that you cannot do it and that you need help. And to see that you need help and then to take the next step, which is to ask for help. But then you got to try and, as Mr Macdonald said to me once, grow up to meet it. Because it's coming down. I remember once in a class, he said, or rather, not in a class, it was a private lesson, just a few people in the room, and someone was going through a very, very difficult part of their life. And they were suffering quite a bit. And he said very quietly, how much is it suffering to come down to meet us? And that puts another completely different view of them, because most people are obsessed with themselves. And that's where it begins. So that's where it began with me. I mean, something brought me to him because of certain injuries I had or illnesses. I mean, they haven't gone away. So the technique per se, or its exploration, doesn't necessarily take away your illness or your pains or whatnot, but it can help you to receive it more meaningfully. Very few people pass through this world without suffering.
Yeah.
But it depends how you suffer. I mean, read Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali wrote a great text on that called The Alchemy of Happiness. And see what he says about illness and sickness. People confuse illness and sickness and disease. They're three different things. And they get woven into one thing. So there is disease in the sense of being out of ease. And there's illness. There's as many illnesses probably as there's stars in the sky. And then there's sickness. The Tibetans put it very well, or in the Eastern tradition of Vidya, ignorance. Sickness is a state of not being aware. And I've been beside people who died in illness, in disease, but were anything but sick. Mr Macdonald was like that. He had a lot of pain in the last years of his life, but he was not sick.
So if sickness is a lack of awareness, then this work can help with sickness.
There's someone, I forget his name, he was a great Tibetan doctor. In one of his books, I had this intuitively first, but it came to me intuitively. There were many diseases in the sense of being out of ease, but there was only one sickness, the sickness of sleep. And sleep is used a lot in the esoteric traditions, both East and West. One of the last people to use it accurately in the West was Leonardo da Vinci. In one of his writings he said, "Why sleepest thou? Why are you asleep? We think we are awake." And this was to understand Mr Macdonald's work, or any of those people we have mentioned at the beginning, the depth of their being touches on all of that. At least with me it did.
So you were trained in oriental medicine?
I never qualified. I stopped studying in Chinese medicine under a remarkable man in Australia, and also some Western herbalism, but I never qualified.
You were always interested in that, and also martial arts? At least you said you do a lot of Tai Chi.
I was interested, yes. I mean, I always knew, even as a child, one day I would practice Tai Chi, and ironically, it was in London I met this woman who manifested into my life, Miss Rose Lee, who was quite an extraordinary teacher, but the way she taught her art, I mean, I only really studied Tai Chi and Bakwa with her, but if you did all what she was offering, it would be Tai Chi, Chini, Bakwa, sword, spear, calligraphy, language, philosophy. You'd be studying 8 to 10 hours a day. But she said all of it was a practice. All of it was a practice for calligraphy.
Oh, right. And studying that was before the Alexander?
No, it was at the same time.
So you also continued that over a long time?
I was with her for 15 years. But the way she taught, I remember once, after Mr Macdonald's book was published, the first edition, I gave it to her as a gift. And then I wasn't there, but in our more senior class a few weeks later, she took out of her bag and she held up the book and she said, "This is the work." How did she know that? When I first met her, she was scathing of the Alexander technique. I remember I've been in a room with many people, and she said, "Weakens people." And I couldn't agree more. Badly taught, it will weaken. I've seen it. It becomes too airy-fairy, too light. It's the wrong type of light.
Okay.
There are different types of light, so sometimes when you begin, if you've got a good teacher on the Alexander technique or any technique, you might go through an initial period of being very light and it's all lovely, but that's only, as St. John of the Cross indicates, that's only the first dawn. It's a false dawn, and it can be, people think this is it, and they hang around that. But if you keep on going, you go down into the dark. You've come out of the dark, brought you to this technique, and then it looks pretty good, and then other things begin to happen in you. But if you keep going, you'll come to the second dawn. And obviously there's other dawns. Because as you go up, you go down. As Macdonald used to say, up to go down to go up.
Yeah.
So, and there's some people go down very, very far. I'm not just talking about depression, I'm talking about the inner journey. I mean, the Christ figure, he goes down after his crucifixion, he goes down into the underworld.
So you're talking about the dark night of the soul.
Yes, it's a great piece of writing, St. John of the Cross. I recommend it. He's been a great help in my life.
Yeah.
I go back and read it every now and then.
So what's the connection between Eastern philosophy, martial arts, all that, oriental medicine, and the Alexander technique?
Non-doing. Listening. Things that one has got to work for without any guarantee that they'll be given or they will manifest. Quietness. Miss Goldie used to often begin our lessons by saying, be quiet, be still.
Yeah.
Try being still. Now you can be still in the body, relatively. Try being still in the mind. Without suppressing, without fooling yourself. And then that's why the seeing is so important. In his first of the 5 indicators he gives that makes up the Alexander technique, on the first line, first sentence, Mr. Macdonald has in his book, recognition of the force of habit. Most people miss that. There's 3 things going on there. First is recognition. You can't recognize unless you see. You have to see, this is how I am, really see it, and the more you see it, the more you will see it.
Mm.
Second is force. So those forces, I would wish he had said, it added in recognition of the forces, and then gone on to say recognition of the force of habit. Then he brings in last and third, habit. Some habits are good, they help you, and some habits get in the way. You have to learn how to discriminate.
Mm.
But the key is seeing.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental.
Seeing in the meaning of awareness.
Yes, and ultimately being seen from another place in yourself, which doesn't belong, is not in the ordinary. Because the ordinary only can see the ordinary.
Mm.
Sometimes there's a sense of wonder, but that's different. Real seeing comes from a higher place. Then you are seen, you're under the influence of being seen.
Mm.
It's actually more important than what it is you see. But one has to experience that.
Yeah. Since we're at the principles, can you define the other ones?
Well, Mr. Macdonald says at the core of it is inhibition and undoing.
Yeah. So what's your current take on inhibition?
It's essential.
Can you define it?
No. But be careful with suppression.
Yeah.
Because I've even seen people who've written books on the technique and they're talking about suppression.
Yeah.
That's why the seeing, the liberation comes through the seeing.
Mm.
If you can bear it. Because you begin to see all types of stuff inside yourself. That's where Carl Jung or such a person can be helpful to help you to process some of it. Because there's a lot of we don't know ourselves.
Mm.
St. Thomas puts it very well in the Gospel of Thomas. He says, if I remember correctly, if you bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will save you.
Mm.
Should you not bring forth that which is within you, that which is within you will destroy you. Everything is in here.
Yeah.
Everything. I said to people, you have to recognize the heckler in yourself. If you think that force is not in you, you're fooling yourself.
How to get there?
It will come if you just... I keep saying to people, keep it simple. Simple thing, just leave your backpack. I find it takes me about a year sometimes to get people just to leave a simple thing, leave your backpack. Because the pull forward is ferocious. The power of, we don't see, it takes quite a while to see the force. That's why the force is, it's very important to study this. Those laws. And people are, you get driven, you get pulled, you get driven. And you have to learn first of all to see it. And then you have to learn how to gently go against it. Intelligently. Otherwise it will destroy you. It's destroying the world.
Yeah.
People blame people from the outside. I say to people, look at the force behind. It doesn't matter if it's an American president or what any. See the force behind it. But people only see the person. People think President of America is a powerful man. He's not. He's an idiot just like me. I saw that. I went mad once. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. I was a parliamentary writer, and I remember in this big complex in Australia, in the federal government, walking between two buildings and realizing that the then President of the United States was exactly like me, in control of nothing, in himself. And that was horrific. And I remember feeling it and the effect it had on me.
Isn't that a Buddhist practice, this walking through the streets and recognizing that everyone's just like me?
If you can do it, yes. Yes. Fortunately, everybody is not quite like me, because then you meet people who Mr Macdonald was one of them, and Miss Goldie, Walter, Rose Lee, they had something else. Not saying the forces weren't still acting on them, of course they were, but they had some stability inside. I remember the first time when I was alone with Mr Macdonald, I mean really alone outside of a teaching situation. It was like I was standing in a little garden and he came walking towards me, and I remember everything inside me was all stirred up. So it was like a big planet coming towards me. And there's a small planet and a big planet, and the little planet gets as the big planet is passing.
Yeah,
and then
gets into the orbit.
Yes, you come into the orbit of what he had was this extraordinary. It was more than stillness. It was in touch with silence. People confuse silence and quietness. They're two different things. Silence is much greater, but it can be facilitated through the quietness. That's why quietness is so important. It can begin to prepare you for silence. Silence is not what people think it is.
Is that the unknown then?
No, I could offer an indication. It's to do with the whole of the universe is wounded. The whole of the cosmos is wounded. We're all, in some sense, wounded. We're only part of something greater. If one can begin to open one's heart out to the sense of the whole of creation being wounded. So basically, it's not working. You start off trying to work for yourself, to trying to have a better life. Then gradually you begin to realize that it's not about me at all. But it has to begin someplace.
Yeah.
You don't try and start saving the world. That belongs to a Buddha or a Christ figure or people of that elevated being. Or we can begin to take our place. I mean, that's part of the greatness of the essence of the Alexander technique. It can help you to find and take your place, whatever that place is.
Yeah.
Whether it's being in business or being a mother or a farmer or whatever. And then you can that's where the real transformation is.
That's a good sentence.
Yeah, it's very ordinary. But to be ordinary, really ordinary, is to be extraordinary.
Is that your definition of the Alexander technique in a nutshell?
I can offer you, there is no definition, but I can offer you something taken from two teachers, one Mr Macdonald and one from another Eastern tradition. The first part is from Mr Macdonald, which is learn the art of falling upwards. And the second part is into a state of relaxation. They are waiting to receive you. There is no definition of the technique, but if it was, that would be it for me.
Yeah.
Something is there waiting to receive you, but you have to fall up. That's where the antagonistics come into play. Miss Goldie was ever reminding me about that. She had stopped using the language of the school. She had stopped using the language of the technique because she said it becomes so misused as to be next to useless.
Yeah.
So instead of saying inhibit, she would say withhold consent.
Yeah.
And then gradually that would become fixed as well. So one has to be, I got great respect for language and for words used properly.
But you never know how they land.
Oh, but they'll find their place. There's that beautiful biblical expression, and the word is made flesh. If the word comes through, say, living master or whoever, and if it's true, first of all, usually it's head in the head, but gradually, it will work its way through. People don't realize that this form of learning is a chemical process. People get shocked to that. And that's why sometimes you could be with a teacher, you think nothing happens, you go away, and 20, 30 years later, there it is.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of exposing yourself, putting yourself under an influence. Again and again and again, thinking you're going no place, but unbeknownst to you, something is happening deep inside. And then gradually that begins to manifest in ways that are absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
But you can be, I've seen great masters walk down the street, nobody would notice them. Unless you're incredibly sensitive. They don't make themselves known. Some of the finest teachers I've known don't advertise. Miss Goldie didn't advertise. She asked me once in one of my last meetings with her, how do you find your pupils? She said, how do you receive your pupils? And I said, through word of mouth. And she came in front of me in a big smile and she said, whatever that means. So there's a mystery there. What brought me to Mr Macdonald?
Yeah.
I knew nothing about him.
Yeah.
What was it that brought me? It could have been, just so happens to be the Alexander technique. For me, the Alexander technique has within it the possibility of liberation.
Yeah.
But that's not today or tomorrow. Or the Mr Macdonald used to say, closer to you than your next breath, further away than the moon. Goldie used to say, just one thought away. So she had this lovely expression, brain thought. She said, change occurs at brain thought level. She put the two together.
What's your take on directions?
Essential. Of certain essentials. Direction is, again I go back to Mr Macdonald. He used to say in life, you can only go in two directions. You're either going up or you're going down. Simple. If you want to go to the source, you have to go up. Sometimes they would say, you give the analogy of a river. If you want to get to the source of the river, you got to row against the current. You got to go against the current. If you stop rowing, you'll go to the sea, and that's fine if you want to go to the sea. There's nothing to do, the current will take you there. But if you want to go back, or more importantly, backing up, there was a big part of he placed a great emphasis on up, thinking up. One of the first instructions he ever gave me, and it was rather a strange one, But I trusted him and began to practice it. He asked me to think up from the base of my spine. So he didn't ask me to sense up or to feel up, to think up. And there's much more to it than initially appeared. The spine is essential because all the great forces flowing down and flow up pass through the spine.
Yeah.
So he said you didn't have to worry about the down, that took care of itself. But he placed tremendous emphasis on the up. And often you'd hear him calling out to someone, you're taking them down, you're taking the person down. And he told a lovely story about himself. I don't know what age he was when it happened. He said, I was in a room one day working with pupils, and I caught sight of myself in the mirror, he said. And I saw how ugly I was. Obviously, he wasn't talking about his physique. He said, I saw I was taking myself down. What was worse, he said, I was taking the poor man I was working with down as well. And he said this needed correcting. And I think this was a big moment in his life. Either he faced that, began to take himself up, or he gave it up. Why teach if you're taking someone down? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't discriminate. They're actually being taken down without knowing it, because I can take you down and it can be absolutely beautiful.
And you're also talking about, well, the down is important as well, not taking down, but
yes, there is an organic down. It's a lot misunderstood a lot in certain techniques. There's a down that's absolutely essential. And in fact, when I first put my hands on Mr Macdonald, I got a bit of a shock because I felt the down force, and it wasn't a pulling down.
Yeah.
I want to be very clear about that. That I'd never experienced in my life before. Fortunately, something in me understood. So, you got that lovely title by one of Canberra's books, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. So I realized my hands were on touching his being, the weight of his being, which is a weight beyond measure. So as something becomes finer and finer and finer, and something becomes darker and darker, these two great forces, but these two great forces of light and dark can blend. And I saw that in him, especially at the very end of his life. There was no Mr Macdonald per se, but there was this extraordinary presence of being, and I witnessed someone that wasn't going to die. It already died. In the esoteric sense of the word, die, that famous expression, die before you die. And there was nothing fanciful in it. You could see it if you had the eyes to see, or something in me could see that quite clearly. The liberation. So that's why coming to understand the forces. I mean, the interesting thing about Alexander, he didn't obviously know any of this when he started out.
Yeah.
And you talked to the old teachers who were with him after the stroke. I remember Walter saying to me once that, Ted, he said he was a terrible doer. Even after years of practicing on himself, he used to do a lot. And then he had the stroke, and he said he couldn't do. He had to live it. And he said that as a result his work was transformed. And he kept on, obviously, from those that have spoken to me who were around him, said he kept on working like that to the end of his days. And Dr Barlow, who was in the room after he died, said he had never experienced anything like it. And obviously Bill had been around many people who had died, or who had, or corpses or whatnot, in his role as a doctor. But he said there was such a presence in the room, and he was there for a long time after he died. And I experienced something similar with Mr. Macdonald.
Mm.
And anyway, if it's a real living connection between a pupil and a master, which is very precious, that's eternal, it goes on forever. I mean, people like Walter and Miss Goldie and Mr. Macdonald are not dead for me. I've been in one sense, yes, of course, the body has gone into the fire, into the ground. I would say that I feel much closer to them than ever.
Mm.
And I try and remember them when I'm working.
Yeah.
That's why I don't see myself as a teacher.
Mm. You're channeling them.
No, I'm wary of the word challenge. I accept channeling, but I'm wary of it because it can be, one has to be careful with channeling. Of course, one can be channeled and channeled very extraordinarily, but there's very good warnings in all the traditions about the danger of channeling, because sometimes the channeling can be corrupted.
Mm.
There was a great case of that some years back with the Shundok in the Tibetan tradition. So other forces that we know nothing about can infiltrate.
Yeah.
Read Meister Eckhart, the original Meister Eckhart. He says some extraordinary things about that, and he warns about it, the dark side of God.
Mm.
One has to, beyond a certain level, one needs to be careful.
Mm. Mm. And what keeps you going, Ted?
I don't know, because every day I do, and I don't say it flippantly, I do seriously consider stopping. Because it puts you in front of, I cannot do this.
In which way?
You're plain and simple, I cannot do it.
There's nothing to do anyway, is there?
Yes, but if one can really face that, I mean, one can say it. What does it mean to do nothing? And approach it, try and go away and approach it. I've often said, sometimes with business people, it's a great opportunity because you're in life, you're in business, you're dealing with money, dealing with all types of stuff. And some of my best, I don't like using the word pupils, but people who worked with me have been in business. But unfortunately, very few of them keep going.
Mm.
They start off and they go to a certain point. But if they could keep going. And I remember once many years ago seeing an extraordinary interview. I forget which television channel I saw them. And it was in Japan. The head of one of the most senior Japanese banks. And I was very struck by how he was, how his presence in the room, first of all, was very simple and very humble. I suspect he had been at some stage of his life in a monastery or had suffered in the war. He had been through something.
Yeah.
It was palpable, the way he listened, the way he measured when he gave a response. And then in response to some question he said, I realized a long time ago that real revolution occurs in business. So you could say there is the business of the Alexander technique. And if one really made it one's business, I'm not talking about money, I'm talking about really understanding something.
Mm.
That's your investment, and you work with it, you look after your investment.
Yeah, and that's a lifelong journey.
Yes. And it does not necessarily bring you to where you think you're going to be brought to.
Yeah.
And that can be a real disillusionment. I've met many people in the technique who've become utterly disillusioned because it wasn't bringing them health, wealth, and happiness.
who would start Alexander technique to become wealthy and happy.
I mean, I'm not talking doom and gloom. It helps you. I mean, I'm probably not a great example of it, but it's an extraordinary thing just to walk down the street and be there. You might be crying your eyes out, but you can be there. Or you can be happy, or you can be whatever, but you can witness it. You can be a witness to what's happening.
Mm.
That's what Christ said to the apostles. Watch and pray. Pray in the old etymology of the word meant to listen. As a child, I thought the apostles must have been very lazy, or they couldn't stay awake for 1 hour. Every time in the garden at Gethsemane, when Christ went away and he came back, they'd be asleep again. And of course, as a child, I thought it was physical sleep.
Mm.
So going back to what we were speaking about earlier on, they were asleep psychologically.
Mm.
And the Dalai Lama was on record as saying, if you could try and go backwards, I figured what the count was. It wasn't very long, with the mind deflecting. You become enlightened.
Say that again.
If you could go back, try watching your mind without any interference. I would say try counting 1 to 100, or 100 back to 1 without any deflection, without racing, without rushing. It's a very difficult thing to do. So if I said to people, or someone working with me, think up, that's all I want you to do, stay back and think up. And then I put a bit of opposition upon them. And then you will, and I just say to them, try gently to observe what's happening in your mind. Mostly what you'll see is the mind deflect at a critical moment. So instead of going up, you're going down. But you don't see it.
Mm.
So you get deflected. And that's happening all the time. You can see, this is a law. You can study this in anything. Politics, economics, relationships. Things start off going in a certain direction, then they get deflected. So you finish up going opposite to where you think you're going. You think you're going up, when in fact you're going down.
Yeah.
But you haven't picked up the deflection.
Mm.
So it's important. And that was a gift that certainly Mr Macdonald transmitted to me, to be able to detect to a little degree, more or less, when someone is going down. But more importantly, when I'm going down myself.
Mm.
And then Miss Goldie would often say to me when I would deflect, she would stop, and we'd stop the whole thing again.
Yeah. Is there anything that you would like to add? Well, there's of course a lot to say, I know, for hours and hours, but now for this conversation, would you like to add something, or is there something you would like to?
No, but to say it's an extraordinary gift. This unique man worked something out, but he worked, he labored for that. As he says, if you do what I did, you can do what I do. But who really puts in the hours that he put in? You have to unlevel to be a bit of a lunatic, to be in a room on your own, practicing hour after without a teacher. He had no contact with Japan or India or any traditions. He worked something out for himself, and as somebody once said to me, part of his uniqueness, he had the ability to observe what was actually happening, not what he thought was happening or felt was happening, but what was actually happening. This is an extraordinary thing. There was a few times when Mr Macdonald turned the light on in me. He used an old expression, when someone with the qualities of a master looks at you, in a questioning way and asks you, the pupil, what are you doing? And if you can stay in front of that, then you'll see, at least that's what I experienced with him, that what I sincerely thought I was doing, I was working on a pupil at the time, in the training. And what I thought I was sincerely doing, thinking I was doing and feeling I was doing, was not what was happening. And then he just held me there for a few seconds, and then he just turned away. But those were precious because I saw. And there's the gift of a master. They can turn the light on inside you until such time as you can turn it on for yourself. And you see what you're actually doing.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm talking, in all the years I was with him, he only did that to me 3 times.
Mm.
But those 3 times are absolutely priceless. It shows you something. It basically shows you the forces and shows you something in us which can speak all the language of the sacred beautifully. Doesn't give a shit about the sacred. But one has to see that. And that can help it to help take a small step towards liberation.
Mm.
So the technique, if it's properly taught, is priceless, in fact. I mean, I miss those old teachers. I mean, I wish they were here with me. Probably need them now than I ever need them. Because they can be very lonely. I mean, if somebody's very sincere about it, you really have to face something. Mm.
Mm.
So where does that leave us?
Hmm?
Where does that leave us?
Yeah.
I think that's enough.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ted.
Welcome.